Watch how Rupert Lowe unleashes a brutal attack on HMRC, accusing Britain's tax system of crushing businesses under mountains of confusing rules, endless paperwork, and wasted time. As firms struggle to survive, this fiery committee clash exposes frustrations millions of hard-working Britons can relate to every single day. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Britain Daily.
Well, in preparing for today's meeting, I came across a very good quote I'd just like to remind you all of from the very eminent Chief Justice in the 19th century, John Marshall in the US, who said, "The power to tax is the power to destroy." And I think that's a very powerful quote that you can perhaps take away today. And in covering my question, it was interesting. I have this view that you know, this report on the face of it looks good, but I think we're looking at quite a soft target in big businesses. I think most of the tax you're not collecting is not coming from big businesses, it's coming from small businesses, and particularly businesses like Turkish barbers and vape shops that you're doing absolutely nothing about, because probably it's more difficult. And I think the cheap deliverables are much easier to deliver when you're looking at big businesses where you've weaponized people's financial advisors against them, and they are effectively acting for you, not for the company. But I noted that in the report, only 49% of large businesses surveyed by HMRC in 24 agreed that the administrative burden relating to tax compliance was reasonable. That means 51% thought it was unreasonable. So why do you think that is?
I'll kick us off if I may. So the last large business survey, you're absolutely right that 49% felt that the administrative burden of the UK tax system was reasonable. It was 29% that felt it was unreasonable. The balance didn't comment.
51% weren't entirely convinced it was.
Yeah. So, but 29% did say 29% did nail their colours to the mast and said that they thought it was unreasonable. But that has to be taken with the other elements of the large business survey, where 91% of our customers said that they valued and had a good relationship with their customer compliance manager, valued, intimating that they value the certainty and contact that we have with them. And overall, 81% of them said that they had a good experience in their dealings with HMRC. What I've heard from the customers that I work with is that the tax system overall, if you think about the implementation of Pillar 2 and other mechanisms and measures that we've put in place, taken together, mean that there are burdens on the business community. What I would say, though, is I also hear that, as the NAO report said, there is feedback from our customers that we ask for a large volume of information in the course of an investigation or inquiry, for example. And automating the collection of data will make sure that we're able to risk assess much more accurately and avoid the costly investigations further down the line. So one example of that I would give you is the introduction of the International Controlled Transaction Schedule measure that was announced last year. The bit of feedback in the NAO report about when we've opened an investigation into transfer pricing as one common risk that we see in the multinational population is that to understand the position and base out the comparables under the OECD guidelines, we need a huge amount of information, and our customers tell us that costs a lot and they're not always clear why we're asking for it. Mm-hmm. The introduction of the International Controlled Transaction Schedule as an example will mean that we will follow suit with many other G7 countries who've already implemented it. So it won't add to the administrative burdens of our customers, but will enable us to be more effective and targeted at the work that we're doing, hopefully reducing the amount of large-scale information requests that we sometimes need to use with our customers. So
they are expensive for people to gather. And I was going to ask you on that. In my experience of HMRC, and again, I did some parliamentary questions on this, it takes you 26 and a half minutes to answer your telephones, or it did in 24/5, whereas it took the DWP 8 minutes in 24/5 to answer theirs, which I think says a lot about the people paying the tax to the people who are being handed out the tax that's being collected. So why is it that, and again, when you're trying to sort an issue out, it doesn't help when you don't answer your telephones? Yeah. So why can't you get that right?
Average speed of answer at the moment is about 7 minutes. I agree with you. I think, is it 24, 25?
I've done it myself, and sometimes I give up, like a lot of people do. So they waste a lot of time, and that costs money.
Yeah, so we regret that, of course.
Are you going to improve that, or is that a priority?
It is a priority, and it is improving. Our average speed of answer, as I say, in March, April, May, has been single digits below 10 minutes. That is halved on what it was a year ago. We are on track. We'll write to the committee ahead of our annual report once we've finalised the outturned data, but we look set to have hit our telephony standard for the first time in 5 years. And I agree with you. It is very important. The front door is delivering exceptional customer service. People can get through and increasingly resolve their inquiry first time, either online or over the phone.
Well, I think it's only fair on the businesses, because some of them are up against it anyway, and we're going to go on to talk about other burdens that you put on businesses, which, to my point from the John Marshall quote, is arguably it's holding back a lot of British enterprise because they're spending their time collecting tax for you. But I at the end of the day, was quite interested. If we could just move on, I'm pleased about hopefully the phone lines can be answered, like most people's phone lines, immediately within 3 rings, but probably that's asking for too much. I thought if we could go to page 19, figure 4, I thought that was a very illuminating, those were charts that I thought were fascinating, because in my experience of dealing with HMRC, you don't know your own rule book. Your staff turnover is massive, and very often your staff don't understand the rule book either. That's my experience of it. And when you drill down and you see you've got 200 tax manuals totaling 80,000 pages, and the UK tax code is 22,000 pages in 2 volumes, it's hardly surprising. So, and I think if you look at this on the large businesses, when you look at the sort of mauve bar, legal interpretation is a big issue for a lot of these big businesses. So, and in my experience, you often come at me saying that something is, by your own admission, a grey area, but you're going to raise the tax anyway. And you use your larger covenant effectively. You have the taxpayer behind you. Businesses don't. They actually have to make profits and pay taxes. But you actually, I think, bully people using this wretched rule book, which has got more loose ends than a plate full of spaghetti. And I think here, this is a very, very interesting chart. And even if you look at the light blue, that's error. Well, that's an error because your rule book's so complicated, in my opinion. So why can't you, on burden on businesses, why can't you simplify your own rule book? It's too complicated. Do you agree that's fair?
Yeah.
Do you agree that's a fair comment?
Let me say something about what I see in terms of the legal interpretation, the mauve bit, and then maybe Jonathan wants to come in about the rule book more generally. So legal interpretation, the mauve bit of that figure 4 on page 19, is a really big spectrum of behaviour. So at the one end, you have the bits of the tax code that have been there for a long time and haven't kept pace with modern working practices. So, for example, where a permanent establishment is and everyone's working from home in different places now, that's the genuine part. The tax code hasn't kept pace, all the way through to other ends of the spectrum, where we see in a small number of cases what we determine as boundary pushing. So, taking positions that are legally arguable but against the intention of Parliament, where we see, for example, some of the VAT reliefs being claimed in inappropriate circumstances. I don't think that means that...
Slightly getting into the weeds now, because on working from home, you're not entirely clear on what your own rules are on working from home, so you picked a very bad example. But, I mean, what I was interested in here is, do you think that part of the issue you've got with these big businesses, they can't work out the rule book? And what's even more interesting is when you look at all taxpayers, I think a lot of people don't understand the rule book at all, which is why the mauve is so small there, and they get confused by it, and that's why you are able to open up all sorts of issues. And when I say your staff aren't good enough, I've had tax investigations in businesses where your staff have changed 3 times. Yeah. And that means you have to then re-engage with your staff. That means they get loads more cost, loads more administrative burden. And, I just don't think, I think you are doing a lot to damage British enterprise, and I think it could be made a lot simpler, and actually people could live their lives, because most people want to pay their tax, they want to be honest, they don't want to be dishonest, but your rule book is so complicated that half the time they try and do the right thing, but you might take a different view to this wretched homunculus of a book which isn't clear, which may work to your advantage, because you may well then be able to go and tax people more unfairly, but I think we've got to get to the bottom of this if we are to solve issues, and my colleagues talk about collecting more tax and prosecuting more people. I'm more interested in making tax clear so people don't need to waste their time trying to interpret your wretched rule book.
Okay. Can I say 2 things, and then maybe Jonathan wants to come in? So, we do respond to our customers' feedback. When they tell us that there's an area that's unclear, we issue something called Guidelines for Compliance. We're at publication 17, I think, on that. A big part of the move here is around the complexity of multinational corporations, tax affairs, when they're operating across multiple jurisdictions. So transfer pricing is one example I mentioned before. So I think that's a part of it. And we, as I say, we issue guidance to help our customers get their tax right. And just in terms of staff turnover, for our customer compliance managers in large business, 71% have been in post for more than 3 years, 40% more than 5 years. And so we recognise the impact of turnover, and we try to minimise that wherever possible to give consistency. But Jonathan, do you want to say something about the tax code more generally?
Yeah, so in general, there are a number of drivers why you have a more complex tax system. Sometimes, as I said, the economy is changing, so the tax code needs to now adopt to crypto assets. Crypto assets did not exist a few years ago when many of the basic tenets of taxation were laid down. So we do sometimes need to put out additional guidance to make certain we're correctly reflecting economic innovation. The economy itself has changed drastically in the last, say, 20 years, more international, more invisible. So more
80,000 pages. Doesn't that need slimming down?
Well, if it can be slimmed down, we want to slim down.
You
But we also want to
slim it down, do you, Jonathan?
Well,
I don't think it gets slimmed down.
When we can, we will do so. But sometimes that is reflecting also the will of Parliament in terms of legislation. If new legislation comes forward, new taxes come forward. We have two new taxes being developed at the moment, vaping duty, which is launched relatively recent, carbon border adjustment mechanism. They will require legislation and guidance to go alongside that. So that guidance will reflect as well what is going on in terms of the policy environment. And again, the policy environment is set by the government of the day in terms of its...
Do you know how long the Hong Kong tax code is?
No, I don't.
500 pages. So, we've got 22,000 pages. So, look, I just think if you take anything away, please, I think you could make your life a lot easier and our businesses a lot easier if you just made your tax manuals much more simple.
I think we will always look for simplicity, but shortness does not always imply simplicity.
And I know I'm going to use all my allotted time, a bit like the senators in America, so I'd like to, if I can just push on now, because I've got a couple of other things to ask you.
What you've just watched was more than a heated exchange in Parliament. It was a raw reflection of the frustration felt by businesses across Britain. Rupert Lowe's attack on HMRC struck a nerve because countless business owners, self-employed workers and ordinary taxpayers feel trapped in a system that has become painfully complicated, slow and expensive to navigate. When politicians talk about growth and supporting enterprise, people expect action. But for many firms, especially smaller businesses already battling rising costs, inflation and economic uncertainty, dealing with endless tax rules and unanswered phone calls feels like yet another burden pushing them closer to the edge. That's why this debate resonated so strongly inside and outside Westminster. Lowe's warning that the power to tax is the power to destroy tapped into a growing fear that Britain is becoming harder to do business in. Whether it's confusing regulations, thousands of pages of tax code, or the time wasted trying to get answers from HMRC, many viewers will recognise exactly what was being described today. At the same time, HMRC insisted improvements are being made, but the real question is whether struggling businesses will actually feel those changes before more damage is done. So now we want to hear from you. Has Britain's tax system become too complicated? Are businesses being buried under bureaucracy while politicians promise growth? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Britain Daily for more explosive Commons clashes, committee hearings, and the biggest political debates shaking Westminster today.